Thank you for being here tonight, and I appreciate you being here, getting to come together and worship God together like this. Lance gave me this idea last year to do a whole evidence sermon about the stars and about the heavens and the things in the sky. I thought it was a great idea, and I wanted to put it together, and ever since he told me last year that he wanted me to do something like that, I've been kind of working on it all year long. Every time I had a couple of free hours, something like that, I'd spend some time on this. And eventually, it's been a year now, and the last couple of months I kind of assembled it together, and now I'm going to take the opportunity to present it. And I've entitled the sermon what Damon already read in Psalm 8, and we'll read this passage again at the end. I'm going to use it as a way of invitation. But what we're going to do is what the passage says. We're going to consider the heavens. And when we consider the heavens, we're going to see the majesty and the power of our Creator. And I think that's why they're there, and that's what I want to go over with you tonight. I know many of us right now have just started school, and many of us are in that transition when we're about to be in school one day, or we're going to go off to college very soon, and we've been thinking about that. And I wanted to basically as well in this time cover some things that you might hear that might try to challenge what you believe in today. And so that when you go into the classroom and you hear these new things, it won't be a surprise. It'll be nothing new. You've already heard about it before, and you know how to study about it and research it and study it for yourself. So I wanted to cover that as well tonight. And I ask that you say a prayer for me, for personal prayer for me right now. I've just been thinking about this all week, but I'm going to try to tell you about the majesty of God. And that's a hard thing to do. And I've been working on it, and I've been cutting things out, and I've been cutting things in. And to tell you, for one, to edify you, but two, to glorify God, the one who created it all, is such a difficult task. So I ask for your prayers and that this lesson would be beneficial, and it would be at least close to the level that God deserves. Because you truly see His majesty when we consider the heavens like we're going to do. So I wanted to be very organized. And when I wanted to be very organized, I'm going to go ahead and give you three major points that I want to cover with you tonight. Number one is that God's biblical purpose in creating the stars. What is God's biblical purpose in creating the stars? Two, we're going to talk about when the classroom tries to challenge God and talk about some things that you might hear one day in the classroom. And then finally, at the end, we'll talk about how the heavens declare the glory of God and His handiwork there. I want to give you a passage real quick to kind of get our minds centered in on this. And I'm not going to tell you who wrote it or where it is, but maybe you could figure out yourself. It says, "Now when neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, and no small tempest beat on us, all hope that we would be saved was finally given up." Who said that? That when neither sun nor stars appeared for many days, that we lost all hope. That's in Acts 27, verse 20. Luke said that about the storm that him and Paul were caught in, and they were shipwrecked. And Luke says there, and I was looking at this when we were finishing up this Bible material this week, and we covered that passage, and I saw that, and I was like, this is what I'm talking about Sunday. But that when Luke gave up all hope, and Luke admitted that he gave up all hope, is when he could no longer see the sun or the stars for many days. And there's lots of things that we could put a spin on that. For one, you can't navigate if you can't see the sun or the stars. As well, it showed the largeness of the storm and how terrible that was. But also, I think, is that by having a storm that covered the sun and the stars and you couldn't see it for many days, you lose hope because you lose that reminder, that constant reminder that this is God's power. And I think that's one of the chief reasons why God created the stars, is to give us that hope. That constant reminder, this is who I am, and this is what I made, and it only took me a day. And this is what we're kind of looking at, especially with this first one. What is God's biblical purpose in creating the heavens? Well, first we go to Genesis chapter 1. Genesis chapter 1 and verse 14 there, He tells us why He created the stars, because right when He made them, He let us know about them. Verse 14 says, "Then God said, let there be lights in the firmament and the heavens to divide the day and the night, and let them be for signs and seasons and for days and for years. And let them be for the lights in the firmament of the heavens to give light on the earth. And it was so." So here in this passage, He creates the heavens so that He can divide the day from night, and so it can be signs and seasons and days and years. That God's idea when he created the stars is I need for them, the humanity, the humans I'm going to put on this earth, to be able to tell when's day, when it is night, what season it is, what the day is, what the year is. All of these things is why he created the stars. Does that still work today? It absolutely does. The stars tell a better time than our computers do. And I have really just a little demonstration, and I'll show you this if you come up to me after, and I'll let you look at it. But this is a star chart. That's what it's called, and it's really simple. It's just a piece of paper with a wheel in it, and it spins. And the star constellations are down here. So what you can do is you can go outside, and you can point this thing north right here, and you can go ahead and put on here what stars you see in the sky. When you find what stars you see in the sky, you can look up here, and by judging of what the stars are down here, it will tell you exactly what month it is, what day it is, and what time it is. And we can do this in 2016. If Adam had this type of technology, and I know this is incredible technology right here, but if he had something like that, he could go outside and Adam could tell you what day it is, what month it is, and what time it is. That's how organized the stars are. They are almost perfect. And what it does is it makes you think, wow, it's almost like this all was designed. That's what it's supposed to do because it's that organized and that amazing that you can able to do this. And if you want to see this after, come to me and I'll let you look at it and play with it as long as you promise not to break it. So there we see right there's a purpose for the stars. In Job 38, and I've never done an evidence sermon without going to Job 38, but here's a passage that we'll use tonight. He asks Job there, he says, can you bring out Mazzaroth in its season? And all Mazzaroth means is constellation. It is a star constellation. It literally means that. Can you bring out a constellation in its season? Or can you guide the great bear with its cubs? Do you know the ordinance of the heavens? Can you set their dominion over the earth? Here he actually says, and he brings out that there's constellations. And in these constellations, God has ordained them. He has set them here so that they can tell the seasons. He brings it out in his seasons. And he gives the example of the great bear and its cubs. Because this is so well put together, the universe is, you can know when it's been a year. You can know when a season is coming to a close. You obviously can know when a day is coming to a close because of how well the universe is put together in the night sky. I think it's so funny sometimes, and some of you that were in the junior high class with me will remember this, but it's so funny that some people will look at Genesis and they'll say, well, right here it says that this person lived to be 900 something, but you know what? That's probably not true because back then they didn't have calendars and they didn't really know how many years they had lived. They hadn't known when a year had passed. They didn't know when it was their birthday. I beg to differ. If you have a brain and you have two eyes, you can look up in the night sky and you can tell when it's been a year. Constellations come in, and then the next season they leave. And in the next season they come back. And when they come back, guess what you know? It's been a whole year because it is so well put together. So I want to give an example of this, and I want to use God's example here of the great bear and its cubs. Does the great bear and its cubs move out in the season as God says it did in Job and as he said they would in Genesis 1? Hopefully you may be able to see this. If you can, I'll help you out. But here, because I can't see it at all back here, is basically, this is an app called Sterilium, and it's free to download, and you can get it for yourself, and you can look at all this stuff to your heart's content. These are pictures that are taken in Trustful. So the people that actually made this use this in a farm in Trustful, and what they do is they take a picture every minute, and they've assembled them all together, and these pictures are the same every year. This is a picture in March at 9 p.m., at March and 9 p.m. When God is talking about the Great Bear, he's talking about this constellation right here, what we know as Ursa Major. Here's the bear's tail, that's the bear's nose, and here's the bear's feet. And what we know this is as the Big Dipper. This is the Great Bear. Its cub is Ursa Minor, the Little Dipper. And probably the canines over here were the other cubs that God was mentioning, but we don't use those as cubs. We talk about them as dogs. But here, Ursa Major, and here's the cartoonist adaptation, so I think you can see this a little better. But here's the great bear, and in March, it's high in the sky. That's where it is. It's always been there, and it always will be there until God rolls all this stuff up and he gets rid of it. But here's the great bear. It's high in the sky in spring. Guess what the bear does in its season? Throughout the summer, the bear will travel down. This is a picture in June at 9 p.m. as well. You can see the bear used to be here in March at 9 o'clock. Now at 9 o'clock, it's here. Guess where it moves to the point of September? It continues to go down over the horizon. Now the bear is right here, and its cub is following it around. The bear is being brought out. It's guiding the great bear in its season. If you go outside tonight and look for the great bear, it's easy to find. It's the Big Dipper. It will be right there. It will be right there because God is bringing the great bear out in its season. And I kind of wanted to show a play-by-play of where you see the bear. Here's the tail. Here's the bear right here. Kind of took away the animation, so it's easier to tell, okay, this is going to be it. But you can see just in the process of a week how much this bear will move every time at 9 p.m. And here's Monday, here's Tuesday, Wednesday, this Thursday, this Friday, Saturday, and next Sunday. What is the bear doing? The bear all summer long has been traveling back down, going back over the horizon. And springtime comes around, guess what's going to happen? The bear's going to come out, and then the bear's going to go up here in March, and then he's going to come back down, and he's going to go back over the horizon. What is this? That is a clock. That's exactly what that is. That is a clock that works perfectly, always on time. And what the bear does is when the bear's out, you know it's springtime, it's going to be spring. Oh, wait, the bear's going down every night. Oh, summer's ending, summer's gone. The bear's gone. And it's kind of fitting that it's a bear, right? That God calls it a bear, because what do bears do in the winter? Bears hibernate. And what is our bear doing here in the northern hemisphere? The bear is hibernating. Why? Because God guides it out. And this is what his mission is here. I think this is funny that he says this to Job. Can you guide the great bear with its cubs? What's funny about that is that the bear is not guided by Job. Job is actually guided by the bear. Job could look at the bear and he could tell what season it is. As well, the bear is what points to the North Star. Here's the bear, here's the Big Dipper, and you can use the lid of the Big Dipper right here to point to the North Star right there. Is the bear guided by Job? No. Job is guided by the bear, what he needs to do, when he needs to plant his crops, where he needs to go. Who guides the great bear, though, if Job is guided by the great bear? God guides the great bear, because this is the way he set it up. And I wanted to show you this and give this demonstration because it is so organized. It is not chaos in the universe. It has been meticulously put together the way God wanted it to be. And his organization here, his fingerprints, his handiwork is evident if you study how organized the universe has been put together. To continue on this thought, what is God's biblical purpose? I think as well, he uses it sometimes to show some things of his intelligence, his knowledge of the stars, and tell us about things before we knew that this actually the way it was. For instance, a very popular verse in Isaiah that talks about how he sits above the circle of the earth. Now, usually when we go to this passage, we say, well, most people back in the day used to believe that the earth was flat, but here the Bible showed before all then that the earth was actually a circle. It doesn't say sphere, it says circle, but people would like to allude to this and show that the Bible is correct and all of that, which is a good place to go to. I think it's important to understand is that most people knew that the earth wasn't flat a long time ago. Up probably until the 6th century, people knew that the earth was round. The people that lived in Jesus' time knew that the earth was round. Most people knew that the earth was round. When Christopher Columbus sailed across the ocean, he knew the earth was round. So did everybody on the boat. So did everyone back in Spain. That wasn't the question. Washington Irving made that up for his story. Washington Irving is the guy who also wrote The Legend of Sleepy Hollow. He wrote fantasy stories. He wrote a biography on Christopher Columbus. And he came up with this whole thing about how Christopher Columbus wanted to prove that the earth wasn't flat. That's not how it happened. Most people knew that. Ancient historians give Pythagoras, the guy who came up with the Pythagorean theorem, is to be the first person that published that the earth is not flat, it is a sphere. And that was in the 6th century BC. Most ancient historians give him the credit for to be the first one to publishing it. However, in Isaiah 40:22, Isaiah writes, it is he, talking about God, who sits above the circle of the earth. And its inhabitants are like grasshoppers, who stretches out the heavens like a curtain and spreads them out like a tent to dwell in. And guess what time Isaiah published his book? Around the 7th century BC, a full 100 years before Pythagoras lived. So if you want to give credit to someone who published that the earth was a circle and not square and flat, you can give that credit to Isaiah. And what's funny about this, unlike Pythagoras, Isaiah wasn't a mathematician. He wasn't a scientist. He was a prophet that one day God told him and said, I need someone to write down stuff for me. And Isaiah said, here am I, Lord, send me. Isaiah was a prophet. But he gives the credit for the first one to publish that the earth was a circle. I think this one packs a powerful punch, but I think this next two pack more of a powerful punch. Here in Job 38, again, to finish out what we've already read, he said to Job, can you bind the cluster of Pleiades or loose the belt of Orion? That's what he asked to Job. And I believe a couple of years ago I brought this up in another sermon that I was doing, just talking about God's power and might. And this is a demonstration of that, this verse. God talks about it again in Amos 5:8. Well, Amos says it about God. He says, he made the Pleiades and Orion. He turns the shadow of death into morning and makes the day dark as night. So here, mainly looking at Job, can you bind the cluster of Pleiades? Can you loose the belt of Orion? Here's my source. All of these things, if you want to go back on my PowerPoint, I have all my sources for this, so you could look more into this if you'd like. But here's a picture of Pleiades and Orion. Here, you probably know this is Orion right here. Here's his head, here's his belt, here's his sword, and there are his feet. But here, of course, is Orion's belt. In the same frame, if you look at Orion, you can also see Pleiades. Here's Pleiades right here. There are 7 stars, and they're very clustered together as God said it was. I think it's interesting that God would tell Job, look at Orion, look at Pleiades. So what Job could have done when God was talking to him, if it was nighttime, look up, and he could see them in the same spot. You know, it's not like God said, look at Orion and look at Pleiades. It was one view, and it got all of Job's attention right here, Orion and Pleiades. And he says he loosened the belt of Orion. He said he bound the cluster of Pleiades. Now, what we've learned in the 90s by looking at the Hubble telescope pictures and learning about gravity and how things work is that, guess what? Orion's belt is loose and Pleiades is bound. The Orion stars, even though they're very close together from our image, these 3 stars do not affect one another. They are so far away from each other that gravity does not affect the other 2. They are so that far away. So what is Orion's belt? It's loose, isn't it? Now, Pleiades looks like there's almost kind of the same togetherness there, distance from our perspective. But in reality, Pleiades is, guess what? Gravitationally bound. They don't move away from each other. Orion's belt, one star may move a little away from the other. Pleiades doesn't do that. And Pleiades, the cluster as a whole, travels 25 miles a second in its own orbit. That's how fast it travels, but it's gravitationally bound. Why is Orion's belt loosened? Why is Pleiades bound? Because God did it. That's the way he made it, and he decided to inform Job that that's what he did. One more in this section. We also learn through the Bible that the earth hangs on nothing. And again, this is a very popular passage here. Here's pictures recently that NASA took. They got a probe on the other side of the moon. And so it's taking pictures of the earth as the moon passes by. Here in Job 26, it's verse 7, and then I'm going to read verse 14. Job says this about God. He stretches out the north over empty space. He hangs the earth on nothing. Indeed, these are all the mere edges of his ways, and how small a whisper we hear of him. but the thunder of his power. So here he says that the earth hangs on what? Nothing. Nothing. What's interesting about this is you go and actually look at ancient writers and when they talk about the earth, unlike the earth being flat and people believing that, thinking ancient people, they didn't believe that. But it's funny to look at the things they believed on what the earth sat on. Many of the Hindus believed that the earth sat on elephants, and that's the way that the earth got around. Many ancient people, you've heard about the earth being on turtleback. There's some myths and legends that talk about the earth being on turtleback. You don't have to go very far to look at Aristotle, and Aristotle said that the earth is supported by a giant glass dome. And that glass dome is what's there that's supporting the earth and supporting all the stars. And most people in Jesus' day, up until the 1600s, believed that there was a glass dome that supported the earth. That was the main thought. However, when Isaac Newton mathematically discovered gravity in 1680, this all went away, and we find out that Job, chapter 26, was right. The earth hangs on nothing. It is supported by invisible barriers that we cannot see and we cannot touch. It hangs on nothing. And God used gravity to hang all of the universe. It's held together this way, and I think we could spend a whole sermon on gravity. I love the concept of gravity because no one knows why it works. It just does. And if we didn't have gravity, life wouldn't be possible as we know it. So it's obviously that God said, look, I need the waters, I need them there. And when God said he wanted the waters there, gravity happened, and that was the end of it. And now we still today are trying to figure it out. But here God said, well, through the Holy Spirit, that he hangs the earth on nothing, and that's what we see today. When, part 2, when the classroom tries to challenge God. Let me give you 2 examples of this. Number 1, if you one day are planning to go to college or some type of secondary school, I encourage you to take astronomy, especially Astronomy 101. Astronomy 101 is a breeze. It is a great class. You go in there, as long as you show up to class, as long as you get to be friends with your professor, you will probably get an A. Because it's very straightforward, it's very simple, it's an easy science that you need. So y'all that are going to school, you listen to this. Astronomy is a good class to make an A in. Now, Astronomy 102, that's a whole other story. And if I know Lance told me he went to Astronomy 102, I'm sure some of you did. I think that was a little bit more difficult. So I did Astronomy 101 and then I did Biology 101. I try to split it up there. But if you take an astronomy class, which you should, there are going to be some things said that are going to be challenging what you believe in God. And I wanted to go over these 2 main things because I don't want anyone here to go into a class or to hear about this from somebody else and think, I've never heard of this before. This is incredible. This changes everything, because it really doesn't. So now you can go to this class and you hear one of these things and you go, oh, wait, Andrew talked about this that day. And you could go back to this and you could look it up on your own, or if you call me and want to talk about it, I'd love to talk to you about it. But you'll be familiar with it now. Number 1, the thing I heard the most is the Joshua problem, as they would call it. And you can turn there if you can't read it, or you could read it up here on the screen. Let me quickly remind you about what happened in Joshua chapter 10. Joshua is slaying the Amorites, and previously we see that God actually sends hailstones to these Amorites, and the Amorites, they're getting pounded by these giant hailstones, so they start fleeing. Well, Joshua understands he's got to slay all the Canaanites. So his plan in this is he needs more daylight so he can spend more time looking for these fleeing Amorites, and so he can slaughter them. Let's look here in verse 12. Then Joshua spoke to the Lord in the day when the Lord delivered up the Amorites before the children of Israel. And he said in the sight of Israel, sun, stand still over Gibeon, and moon in the valley of Ayan. And the sun stood still, and the moon stopped till the people had revenge upon their enemies. Is this not written in the book of Jasher? So the sun stood still in the midst of heaven and did not hasten to go down for about a whole day. And there has been no day like that before it or after it that the Lord heeded the voice of a man, for the Lord fought for Israel. So here we see that Joshua, needing more daylight, says, sun, stand still over Gibeon, and moon in the valley of this Aijalon or Aion. I'm not sure how to pronounce that. But he asked for the sun and the moon to stand still. Then Joshua records that the sun stood still and the moon stopped. And even Joshua references another book that we don't have, saying that that book too acknowledges that the sun and the moon stopped for a whole day. This was a miracle. This is what this was. And this gets brought up a lot in an astronomy class. And I'm about to explain why. Probably many of you know why already. In 1615, Galileo was trying to prove to the world that the earth did not revolve around the sun, that the sun did not revolve around the earth, that the earth revolved around the sun. And Pope Paul V stood up to him and told him no, that it is in fact that the earth is the center of the solar system, not the sun. And he says the reason is because we can go to Joshua 10 and we know that the Bible's always true. And Joshua said that the sun stood still. But in fact, the sun doesn't move. So to explain this in more detail, here's the sun, here's the earth, here's the moon. Up until 615, and I know there's exceptions everywhere. There's some people that did not believe this in 1615 and before. But Galileo's point was that this right here is not true. But this is what most people believed, is that the earth was in the center of the solar system and the sun and the moon revolved around the earth. That's how people believed. So basically Joshua says, stop, and the sun stops and the moon stops. Therefore Joshua has more daylight. Now looking only at the passage and looking only at this diagram, this does make sense. You would understand why someone would believe this is the way it's set up. The sun moves, and when the sun stops, because God makes it stop on Joshua's request, Joshua is given more daylight. So this is what makes sense, but we learned at 615 that Galileo proved mathematically that that wasn't true by looking at the phases of Venus. In reality, many of us know this is actually how the solar system is set up. The moon does revolve around the earth, but the earth itself spins as it revolves around the sun. So by the earth spinning, it makes it look like the sun is going up and going down, going up and going down. But in reality, we're spinning. And because we're spinning, it looks like the sun is moving, but in fact, it's not. Now, there's a whole lot of things I could say about this, that this isn't really a problem. This really isn't an issue. Before I kind of give some examples, let me say this. Everything in the Bible is true. That is a true statement, but you have to say that under context. Everything in the Bible is true, but you need to understand the context. If you just pick out a random page in the Bible and a random verse, whatever statement you may read, it may not be true. Let me give you an example. The line in Genesis that says that Satan told Eve that if you eat of the tree, you will not die. That is in the Bible, but is it true? No, it is a lie. And by context, we can understand that is a lie. We see at the end of this sermon in Revelation, Jesus says, I am the bright and morning star, talking about the star Venus. Does that literally mean that Jesus is Venus? No. By context, we understand that that is symbolic by nature. Everything in the Bible is true, but you can't nitpick phrases and say, look, Joshua said the sun stood still, and we know that the sun doesn't move. You can't do that without taking things into context. So there's some things that you could look at this and understand this is not as big as an issue as an astronomy professor, an unbelieving astronomy professor would want to make it. This is something I just put for humor's sake. Imagine if this is what happened. So Joshua, verse 12, he spoke to the Lord in the day of the Lord delivered, and he said there at the end of verse 12, sun stand still over Gibeon and moon in the valley of Aijalon. Imagine that God immediately responded and said, and then God spoke to Joshua and corrected him, saying, no, Joshua. Actually, in reality, for you to have more daylight, I'm going to have to stop the earth from spinning. And when I stop from the earth from spinning, therefore you'll have more sun. And by the way, the moon, you're right about that. It does revolve. I'll stop the moon too because that's easy for me. But I just needed to quickly correct you about this because you had it wrong. Imagine Joshua's facial reaction. Why is he giving me all this information that I don't need right now? I'm in the heat of battle. I'm trying to kill people, and God's trying to give me an astronomy lesson. This wouldn't make a good story. This wouldn't be a good account. Because God is an understanding God. In reality, what happens is that God, being an understanding God, understood what Joshua was asking for. Joshua is the one that said, sun, stand still. That wasn't God, that was Joshua. When Joshua said, sun, stand still, God understood that Joshua was asking for more daylight. So what happened? God gave Joshua more sunlight. He didn't correct him. He didn't help him out. He didn't need to do all this. He just did what Joshua needed for him to do. As well, Joshua was a warrior. Joshua was not an astronomer. Joshua was not a scientist. Joshua, in the heat of battle, did not care whether the sun moved around the earth or the earth moved around the sun. Joshua didn't need to know that. It didn't matter in that situation. As well, and I think this is the biggest kicker of all, from Joshua's perspective, that day, the sun did stand still. It stood in one place in the sky. Therefore, from Joshua's perspective, when he accounted through the Holy Spirit that the sun stood still, from here's his perspective, it was truth. That's what happened. The sun stayed in one spot in the sky, and I was given plenty of daylight for the whole day. That is what Joshua wrote in his account. Many will look at this and they'll even take it a step further and they'll say, well, Andrew, there's so many problems with this. If God actually did just stop the earth from spinning, what about the magnetic field? What about all these other things that we know so important to the earth spinning? And this is something that we really miss when we talk about this, is that number one, chief of all, this is a miracle. It is supposed to be in its very nature impossible. Being that it is impossible and that it happened, that's the very thing that made it a miracle. It was supposed to be impossible. God, the one with all things, nothing is impossible, made it happen. In its core nature, that is what it's supposed to be. And I think that really helped me understand this from this perspective, and hopefully it will aid you too in understanding that this isn't a problem at all. This is just the way the count was set up, and it fits well with what we know today and what we read in the Bible. I don't see a problem with this at all. And of course, if any of these things, if you want to talk to me more about it, I'd love to. I'd love to explain this in more detail, but I'd like to move on. The second question that you might hear in the astronomy classroom is the starlight question. The starlight question. And this is how the starlight question goes. Number one, you got to understand what a light year is. A light year is not time, it is distance. It is distance. It is how far light can travel in a year. It is the distance, and this is around 6 trillion miles. Put up here a picture of the star Vega. Vega. It's a blue star, and in the summer sky, it is the brightest star out there. And if you want to look at Vega tonight, if you pretty much go outside and you look straight up, the brightest star you see will probably be Vega. It's part of the summer's triangle. Here's the Earth, and we know that Vega is 25 light years away from the Earth. Meaning that the starlight that Vega produces, that starlight, it takes 25 years for that light to go all the way, reach Earth, and reach into your eyes so that you may see it. It took that light 25 years to get there. So tonight, if you go and look at Vega, the starlight you see was produced by that star in 1991. That's how long that light took to get to you. If for some reason today, Vega turns green, if today it turns green, we will not see it turn green until 2041 because it took 25 years for that light produced to get to our eyes. Now, this is the kicker to this, and this is what people think might be a problem. What if there's a visible star that's 55 million years away? 55 million light years away. And the problem that they would bring up is that if you believe the Bible and you believe that the universe has only been around for 6,000 years, how can I see a star that's 55 million years away? And that's true. You can see stars that are 50 million light years away. That is true. So, how could the Earth only been created 6,000 years ago? How could the universe only been created 6,000 years ago? There's a time problem. This star would have not had the time to send that light all the way to earth? Well, the easiest answer and the most truthful answer for a creationist and for an atheist is the same answer. We don't know. We don't actually know how that works. Now, there's several theories that are very promising, and let me just share two of them with you. One is the mature creation theory, and that is when God created the universe, He created an adult universe, not a baby universe. So when He made Adam, was Adam a baby or was he a man? Adam was a man. The trees in the garden, were they saplings, were they seeds, or were they full-grown trees bearing fruit? They were full-grown trees bearing fruit. So if God made the earth as an adult, He made the universe as an adult as well. So the universe perhaps shows light that is 55 million years old, not because that time has passed, but because God created it that way. So that's the mature creation theory. The most promising theory that the scientists that I read, the books that I read for all this, say that they think the most promising theory is the gravitational time dilation, the last one here. There might be 5 people that understand the gravitational time dilation theory. I'm not going to try to get into it very long, but it's basically that when light travels for a really long time, that time is irrelevant and that time doesn't matter. If you like math, I know Damon loves math. If you're someone who loves math, this is something great that you can look into, and I put the source up here so you can look at it to your heart's content about that theory. But I think the starlight question can kind of be handled from a biblical perspective of understanding some things. Number one, does a creationist need a perfect answer to the starlight question? If you believe in creation, do you need a perfect answer to this? If that best answer you have is, I don't know. Does this, I don't know answer negate all the other evidence we've already talked about? I don't think it does. It really does not. If someone presses you about this and continues on about this, there's a great answer to this to stop the questioning. And if that person is an atheist or agnostic, ask them, if you want me to have a perfect answer for the starlight problem, I need you to give me first a perfect answer for the horizon problem. To make it very simple, the horizon problem has to deal with if the Big Bang happened, then the temperature of the universe should be only at a certain point. So like the explosion happened, and the temperature goes out and out and out and out and out. But in reality, when you look at the temperature of the universe, it's all the same temperature. So it doesn't make sense. It doesn't work. And there's a source, again, if you'd like to learn more about that. But it's another problem that every atheist has to say, I don't know. I don't know why. What's funny about the horizon problem is the people that discovered it in the 1960s, they won a Nobel Prize for it, and they presented it as this proves the Big Bang. And that's what they pushed it as. And it was like maybe 5 years went by, and there was some creationists that was like, actually, this is evidence for us. And so it kind of all flipped upside down. You can read about that. It's an interesting problem. But I think that basically explains it. And let me finish this with this. There is only really one thing that you need a good answer for. And that question is, did Jesus Christ, did He raise from the dead? That's the thing you need a perfect answer for. And these books equip you to answer that perfectly. That is what our faith is built on. And that's what you need to know. If we don't have all the answers, that's fine. And guess what? Until Jesus comes back, we're not going to have all the answers. And that's just the way it is. And to make a mountain out of a molehill here, this is what we need to do. Third part. The heavens declare the glory of God. And once I get done with this, Mr. Dale's going to lead 2 songs, because I thought it was very fitting to lead the songs after we talk about this so we can think about these things. And then I'll come back and give a brief invitation. The heavens declare the glory of God. The Psalms teach us this. Psalms 19:1 says, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament shows His handiwork. Psalms 97:6 says, the heavens declare His righteousness, and all the peoples see His glory. This is His purpose. It declares the glory of God. This is a nebula that's taken by Hubble. It is called the Pillars of Creation. And I thought it was fitting to show this one. You can just see how many different colors and how big it is and all the things that make it up and how it's on its own rotation and it's perfect in its own sense. And you can't look at these things and not show that God is a creative being. God is an all-powerful being. He's a mighty being. And I believe He gave us these things to show off His power and His might and His character. That these are the things that He created for us just simply to look at and simply to enjoy. Here's a picture of Jupiter. And what I wanted to do with all the pictures that I put up here, except for that diagram, is none of these are paintings. These are pictures that we've taken. This is the real thing. I remember being in Alabama and taking that astronomy class, and I remember being able to look at Jupiter through the high-powered telescope there at the university. And it was incredible. And I had seen pictures of it in textbooks, but when the sun is producing light and it's hitting Jupiter and it's coming all the way back to the earth and it's going through this telescope and it's hitting your eye, that's light that touched Jupiter that now is touching your eye. And to me, that's just incredible. But you see these things and you see their beauty, and here's a close-up of the spot. When you look at stuff like this, it looks like it's painted. But it's not. It's what's out there. And it declares God's creativity and His beauty and His glory and the things that He could see in His own eyes and that He could create for Himself and for us. Here's one last picture of Saturn. This is probably the one we love the most. You can tell it's a real picture of Saturn, not a painting, because one of the rings, it looks like it's chopped off. And that's because we always have the shadow. The sun's here, it's casting the shadow on the rings and you can't see them. But again, it's another thing you can see through a telescope. And even if you buy like a $100 telescope from the store, you can see the rings of Saturn through that because it's just so big. One other thing, these big giants, Saturn and Jupiter, they actually keep asteroids away from the Earth. And you can look into that and read about that. And they actually protect the Earth from all the things that are floating in the universe that are broken and that could potentially harm us. But they're there in the perfect spot. They work as a shield for our planet so our life can exist here. Genesis 1:16 says, "Then God made two great lights, the greater light to rule the day, the lesser light to rule the night, and He made the stars also." And I love about that passage is the stars there, the planets and all the things that make it up, it was all an afterthought. It was an afterthought here in verse 16. God shows humanity, us, His infinite knowledge, power, His infinite knowledge and power through the stars. There's estimated a septillion number of stars that are make up the visible galaxies that we can see today. And here's a picture from Hubble, again, of just a whole bunch of galaxies. And the person that put this, it was this professor from Cornell, and he said there's probably a lot more than that. That's 24 zeros after that one. It's a septillion. We see and we learn these numbers through the things that we know, and then we also along read passages like this, like Psalm 147. It says that God heals the brokenhearted and He binds up their wounds. He counts the number of the stars. He calls them all by name. Great is our Lord and mighty in power, and His understanding is infinite. That God, He's mighty in power and infinite, and is proved by this because these septillion stars that we just know about, God can count them all, and He also has names for every single one. I can't even come up with 100 names, but He can come up with a septillion names, or even more to that point. And there it shows His power, and His understanding is infinite. One more picture here. This again is back to the Sterlium app. I want to talk about Venus very briefly here. Venus is right here, and Venus is known in the Bible as the bright and morning star. We sing about it in songs like in the Lily Valley, the bright morning star. Venus is my favorite star. It is my favorite star, and I'll tell you why. It always is there. It is always there. It is always the brightest star in the sky. And it always is next to the sun, and that's because Venus is closer to the sun than we are. When you wake up real early, like at 5 in the morning, like this picture was taken, or 6 in the morning, I think it was like 5:50, and the sun's coming up, the last star you will see before all the stars disappear is Venus. And Venus comes up, and the sun comes up with it. When you go to bed at night, when you're watching the sunset, the first star you will see is Venus. And Venus will appear, and then the sun will set. Because Venus is the bright morning star. It's always there. It brings the dawn. There's several Bible passages that talk about this star. And basically what it is it shows that Jesus is the symbolic bright and morning star. Revelation 22:16, I, Jesus, have sent my angels to testify to you these things in the churches. I am the root and the offspring of David, the bright and morning star. As well in 1 Peter chapter 1:19. And so we have had the prophetic word confirmed, which you do well to heed as a light that shines in the dark place until the day dawns and the morning star rises in your hearts. I said at the very beginning that the stars are as a constant reminder of God's power and His might and His glory. Venus, the bright morning star, I believe, is a constant reminder that Jesus Christ rules heaven and earth, that He's always there, and that when you live in the Word of God, and the Word of God is your life, and you abide by it and you do it, that star is a reminder that the dawn has come into your hearts and you provide light to the world. That, I believe, is what the reminder is, and that Jesus is the symbolic message of this. That Jesus is the bright morning star that's dawned in your hearts, and He brings the light. Jesus Christ is the only one that brings the light. Let's sing 2 of these songs, and I thank you again for your close attention and your patience in this. But hopefully these songs will put several of these things in perspective.